Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The labor room reeked of bleach, pain, and anticipation. Chica's screams echoed off the hospital walls as beads of sweat streamed down her face, mixing with tears of agony and fear. She clutched the metal railings of the bed, her knuckles white, her voice cracked. Nurses moved swiftly around her, adjusting the foredrip, checking her dilation, offering her soft words of encouragement. But none of their kindness could drown the pain in her heart, a pain that had nothing to do with labor. She kept glancing at the door, hoping for the man who once vowed never to leave her side. Her husband, Nanso, the man who had promised to hold her hand through everything. But he wasn't there. He hadn't been present for months, not truly. His body was around sometimes, but his spirit, his attention, his love, they belonged to someone else now. Chica didn't know all the details, but her heart had long felt the shift. It wasn't just another woman. It was a betrayal that crushed her from the inside out. And now, at the moment she needed him the most, the room felt colder because his absence screamed louder than any of her cries. Outside the labor ward, Nanso stood like a ghost. His hands trembled, not from joy or fear of fatherhood, but from shame and confusion. He knew what was right. He should be inside, holding Chica's hand, whispering strength into her soul, showing her that their love still had breath in it. But Amanda had arrived, his mistress. The woman who had rescued him when his business crumbled, who covered his debts, housed him during storms, and paid off his landlord when eviction threatened. She had saved him, but at a steep cost. Amanda never failed to remind him that without her, he would be nothing. "I made you relevant again," she always said, brushing his cheek with fingers that felt like shackles. Every smile she gave was laced with mockery. Every gift came with a string. And now she had come to the hospital, not to celebrate the birth of a child, but to assert dominance over the one woman who had his name, Chica. Without warning, Amanda barged into the labor room, her perfume strong, her heels clacking like thunder on the tiles. Nurses tried to stop her, but she pushed past them like she owned the place. Chica opened her eyes wide in disbelief, her body still shuddering from contractions, her lips trembling. Amanda walked straight up to her and, with no hesitation, delivered a loud slap across Chica's cheek. The room fell into stunned silence. "You think pushing out a baby will change anything?" Amanda sneered, her voice cruel. "He's mine now. This child won't bring him back." Chica's eyes welled up with fresh tears, not from the pain of the slap, but from the sight of Nanso standing at the door, watching, doing nothing. Amanda turned to him with a smirk. "Say something. Or are you still too broke to grow a spine?" Nanso's lips parted, but no words came. He lowered his gaze, hands shaking. In that moment, something inside Chica died, and something inside Nanso began to awaken. It hadn't always been like this. Nanso used to be the kind of man who made Chica's heart beat faster just by walking into a room. A hustler, yes, but one with dreams, loyalty, and a fierce love for his wife. Their small business selling electronics thrived at first. They would spend late nights together, sorting through invoices and laughing about customers who tried to haggle over already cheap items. Their love had been their capital, and even when money was scarce, joy was abundant. But everything changed when a supplier scam wiped out their entire inventory. Debts piled up, landlords raged, friends disappeared, and Chica, already exhausted from carrying the weight of their struggles, watched helplessly as her once proud husband crumbled. In his desperation, Nanso reached out to an old contact who introduced him to Amanda, a wealthy entrepreneur with a reputation for fixing men in need. It was supposed to be a temporary business partnership, but Amanda had other plans. Amanda was beautiful in a dangerous way. Her words were sweet but condescending, her actions generous but possessive. She extended her help with a smile, but expected absolute control in return. At first, she offered Nanso a loan, no interest, no questions asked. Then came the dinner meetings, the unexpected gifts, the late-night check-ins. When she started paying his rent, Nanso should have said no. When she took him shopping for clothes and asked to spend the night, he should have walked away. But pride swallowed by poverty makes a man weak. He let her in, and she didn't just enter his life, she took over. Chica knew. She always knew. The perfume on his shirt, the missing hours, the late-night texts. But she never confronted him. She didn't want to fight for a man who no longer saw her. So she kept quiet, for the sake of their unborn child. Amanda relished the power. She didn't just want Nanso, she wanted to ruin Chica. Every time Nanso tried to defend his wife, Amanda reminded him who paid the bills. "Without me, you'd be selling second-hand chargers under a bridge," she would say with a cold laugh. She called Chica the village girl, and often threatened to make her disappear quietly. Nanso tried to play both sides, convincing himself he was only doing what he had to do to survive. But deep inside, his soul ached. He couldn't look his wife in the eye anymore. And yet, he lacked the strength to walk away from Amanda's grip. That's why he had stood frozen at the hospital door. That's why he didn't stop the slap. Because Amanda had broken him, piece by piece, until all that remained was a shell of a man too scared to speak. Amanda's cruelty didn't stop at the hospital. She left the building that night with a victorious smirk, her heels tapping like a song of conquest. To her, the slap wasn't just an outburst, it was a declaration of ownership. She had marked her territory. In her twisted mind, she had won. She posted cryptic messages on social media, subtle jabs at bitter wives who couldn't keep their men. Her friends cheered her on, laughing at how she disciplined a woman in labor. The worst part was the short video clip that a nurse, unknowingly recording during the commotion, leaked online. In the video, Amanda was seen slapping Chica, and in the background, Nanso stood motionless. The video went viral. Everyone in their neighborhood, church, and former business circle saw it. Chica became the object of gossip, and Nanso became the man without a backbone. Amanda loved reminding Nanso of his humiliation. "You stood there and did nothing," she would say, sipping wine. "You're mine now and everyone knows it." Her control deepened. She started locking his phone, screening his calls, and forbidding him from seeing Chica or the baby. "You've chosen comfort over love," she whispered into his ear one night. "So enjoy it, but don't you dare defy me." She began giving him chores like a maid. She insulted him during meetings. Once, when he tried to speak up in front of others, she laughed and threw her drink on him. "Know your place," she hissed. And he took it. Day by day he took it. But deep within, something in him was growing, not rebellion, not courage. Yet, it was rage. Silent, boiling rage that no one saw coming. He was plotting, watching, recording, and storing every moment of Amanda's madness. She thought she owned him, but she had unknowingly created a man desperate for redemption. And Chica? She stayed quiet, but not broken. After giving birth, she named their son Obina, Father's Heart. Not because Nanso had earned that title, but because she believed one day her son would remind him of who he used to be. She raised the child with dignity, never asking Nanso for anything. She never fought Amanda. She never explained herself to the gossips. She simply focused on surviving. But deep down, she waited for the day Nanso would finally open his eyes, not to see Amanda's lies, but to see the woman he had betrayed holding their child with love and pain in equal measure. She didn't know when or how it would happen, but every night she prayed that something, anything, would shake him awake. The house was quieter now, not because no one spoke, but because no one truly listened. Chica sat by the window every evening, breastfeeding her newborn son with tears that fell silently down her cheeks. The baby cooed softly, oblivious to the emotional war that surrounded his existence. Chica had returned home 2 days after the slap, and although her body was healing, her spirit was crushed. She stared at the cot, the diapers stacked by the dresser, and the empty space where Nanso used to sleep. He hadn't returned. Not even a message. Not a word. She clutched her son closer, trying to find strength in the tiny heartbeat pressed against her chest. She didn't hate Nanso. That would have been easier. What she felt was worse. It was betrayal laced with helplessness. The pain of knowing she had given everything to a man who now stood silently as another woman hurt her during labor. The neighbors whispered, and the market women looked at her with pity. "Nah, that woman way her husband's side chick slap for hospital be this," they'd say, thinking she couldn't hear. But she heard it all. She heard the gossip, the jokes, the judgment. She even heard her own mother advising her to pack and return home. But where was home? She had followed Nanso with faith and built this life with him. This was her home, even if it now felt like a prison. Every wall reminded her of happier days, wedding photos, baby plans, handwritten love notes from their early years. Now they mocked her, and yet she endured, not out of weakness, but because she refused to let Amanda break her completely. She focused on caring for Obinna, praying and hoping that somehow, someday, God would fight her battle. She believed in karma. And karma, she knew, never missed an address. Meanwhile, every knock on the door startled her. She feared Amanda might return to finish what she started. Sometimes she'd wake in the middle of the night, clutching Obinna and trembling from nightmares of being attacked again. Her body ached, but her soul ached more. Still, she never let her child see her cry during the day. She smiled through the pain, sang lullabies even when her voice cracked, and made sure the baby felt loved, even if his father didn't show up. And each time she saw her reflection in the mirror, face still slightly bruised, eyes swollen from sleepless nights, she whispered to herself, "You are more than what they tried to make you." Because deep down, Chica knew her silence was not surrender. It was strength, the kind that would one day speak louder than any slap or insult Amanda could throw. The hospital incident had become the talk of town. Amanda, ever proud of her achievement, replayed the slap in her mind like a trophy moment. She boasted about it to her friends, sharing the leaked video and basking in the praise from those who envied Chica's quiet grace. "I've put that rat in her place," she'd brag. She thought being married meant she owned him. Amanda didn't care about moral standards. She lived above them. In her eyes, wealth was license, and she had bought Nanso like property. She didn't just want his body. She wanted his soul, his name, and his public loyalty. She began introducing herself as Mrs. Nanso, even though no legal papers existed. And the world around her enabled it. Her money kept her untouchable, and the slap became an online joke, a meme, a viral soundbite. To Amanda, it was victory. To Chica, it was trauma. And to Nanso, it was the final straw, even though he hadn't acted yet. Inside, Nanso was slowly dying. At first, he convinced himself he had done the right thing by remaining silent, that speaking up would have ruined everything. Amanda's money had paid for the baby's delivery, the house rent, even food. But as the video circulated and strangers sent him shameful messages, he felt something shift. Men mocked him, calling him a spineless husband. Women cursed him for failing his wife. His conscience, once silenced by debt, had begun screaming. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw not a man, but a coward. Amanda didn't make things easier. She printed out screenshots of the video and left them on the table with sarcastic notes like, "You're famous now, baby." The humiliation was unbearable. But the tipping point came when his mother, a woman who had once called Chica the daughter she never had, sent him a voice note filled with disappointment. "If your father was alive to see you today, he would disown you," she said. "That woman gave birth to your child, and you let another woman humiliate her? You are not my son." That message shattered him. It didn't matter how many suits Amanda bought or how many business trips she sponsored. None of it could fix the growing hole in his chest. He began drinking more, isolating himself, and avoiding Amanda's touch. She noticed. "What's wrong with you?" she'd ask. "You should be grateful I made you relevant again." But gratitude couldn't cover guilt. Nanso had become a shadow, haunted by the sound of that slap, the look on Chica's face, and the cold silence that followed. And yet, he still hadn't apologized. He couldn't. He didn't even know where to begin. All he knew was that he had to make things right. Not for redemption, but because he couldn't breathe under Amanda's control anymore. The humiliation had transformed into rage, and rage into resolve. The man Amanda thought she owned was starting to awaken, and he wasn't coming back to beg. He was coming back to fight. Amanda sensed the shift in Nanso, and she didn't like it. The man who once trembled under her gaze was now quiet, withdrawn, and unpredictable. She noticed how he flinched when she touched him, how he no longer laughed at her cruel jokes, and how his eyes now avoided hers. For someone like Amanda, who thrived on power, this was dangerous. So she tightened her grip. One night, over dinner in her lavish penthouse, she placed a document on the table. "Sign it," she said coolly, sipping wine. "It's divorce papers for Chica. I'm done playing second fiddle." Nanso's hand trembled as he picked up the pen, but didn't write. "I'm not ready," he mumbled. Amanda's eyes darkened. "Then get ready. You either marry me and step into the life I planned for us, or I pull every plug I've inserted for you. You'll lose everything, your house, your accounts, your business." Her tone was calm, but her threat was real. Nanso knew she had the power to do it. But what Amanda didn't know was that her desperation had just handed him the key to his revenge. That night, while Amanda slept beside him, Nanso lay awake, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. He had made mistakes, horrible ones. But he wasn't about to let Amanda destroy the only shred of dignity he had left. He began gathering evidence quietly. He remembered things Amanda had said, offhand remarks about bribes, illegal contracts, laundering money through offshore accounts. She was careless, and in her arrogance, she had shared secrets he now realized were worth gold. He bought a small recorder, saved voice notes, and backed up financial documents she left lying around. He pretended to still be under her spell, but every time he smiled, it was with venom beneath his lips. He met with an old friend, an IT expert who owed him a favor. Together, they began compiling a case. Not for court, not yet, but for justice, the kind that would be loud, public, and irreversible. Amanda continued her games, oblivious to the danger brewing beneath Nanso's silence. She thought she still had control. She insulted him during meetings, called Chica trash in front of others, and laughed as she called herself the new queen of his life. But behind that arrogance was fear, a fear she didn't yet recognize. Because the man she had slapped into silence, the man she had mocked and broken, was now a man with a purpose. Nanso wasn't planning to just leave her. He was planning to expose her. And when he was done, the world that Amanda built with manipulation and pride would crumble at her feet. The ultimatum had backfired. She gave him a choice, and he chose war. The days that followed Amanda's ultimatum were silent but tense. Nanso barely spoke, and when he did, his words were short and cold. Amanda thought he was simply sulking, and that he'd return to his obedient self once her money reminded him who was in control. But something had shifted permanently. He no longer feared her, and more importantly, he no longer needed her. He had gathered enough evidence to crush her empire, and every time she barked an order, his smirk deepened. Meanwhile, Chica was still in her small apartment with Obina, living each day with quiet resilience. She had accepted that Nanso might never return, at least not the man she had once loved. He hadn't visited once since she was discharged. No calls, no gifts, nothing. Her heart wanted to hate him, but her soul still whispered prayers on his behalf. She never told anyone, but every night, after putting Obina to sleep, she would kneel beside the crib and ask God to break whatever chain had tied her husband down. But life has a way of pushing people to their edge, and for Chica, that moment came suddenly. One afternoon, while shopping at the open market, she overheard two women gossiping behind her. "I heard the girl he left his wife for is now wearing engagement rings. She's showing it off everywhere. And what kind of heartless man does that to his wife who just gave birth?" The other replied, "Maybe he never loved her. If he did, he would have stood up for her in that hospital." The words pierced through Chica's skin like thorns. Her knees went weak. She grabbed Obina tighter against her chest and walked away, trying to hold back the flood of tears. That evening, she packed a small bag with clothes for her and the baby. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she couldn't keep sitting in the ruins of her old life, hoping a broken man would rebuild it. She would leave behind the memories, the humiliation, the loneliness. But before she could step out of the house, she collapsed, breathless, dizzy, and shaking. The neighbor downstairs rushed her to the hospital. The diagnosis: stress-induced fatigue, mild anemia, and postnatal depression. She hadn't been eating well, hadn't been sleeping enough. She was breaking in silence. Nanso was contacted as the next of kin, and when he walked into the hospital room and saw her unconscious with tubes in her arms and their baby sleeping in a nurse's arms, something inside him shattered completely. The woman he had failed to protect was now lying before him, paying the price for his sins. He sat by her bed, trembling, tears running down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. He picked up her hand and kissed it gently. He realized then that he had waited too long. Amanda's slap hadn't just hurt Chica's face, it had fractured her soul. And for the first time, Nanso knew that this wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption. It was time to fight for the woman who had once fought the world for him. As Chica slept, recovering from her collapse, Nanso paced the hospital hallway in agony. The guilt ate him alive. For months, he had allowed Amanda to manipulate him like a puppet, convincing himself that silence was survival. But seeing Chica like that, pale, weak, yet still holding on, broke him beyond repair. He stepped outside and lit a cigarette with shaking hands, even though he had quit smoking years ago. It wasn't about the nicotine, it was about trying to feel anything other than shame. Just then, a familiar voice called out from behind. "You look like a man on the edge." Nanso turned to see Ikenna, his childhood friend and former business partner, standing there with a knowing look. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Nanso pushed him away after Amanda took over his life. But now, Ikenna's presence felt like water in a desert. They sat in Ikenna's car and talked for hours. Nanso poured everything out: the downfall of his business, the moment Amanda entered his life, the humiliation in the hospital, and how she had turned him into a shell of himself. Ikenna listened without interruption, but when Nanso mentioned the illegal business dealings Amanda had bragged about, his eyes lit up. "You do realize you're sitting on a gold mine of evidence, right?" he said, unlocking his laptop. Ikenna was now a digital forensics expert working for a private security firm. "If we can trace even half of what she's done, we can bring her entire empire crashing down." Nanso hesitated. "I don't want to get arrested along with her." But Ikenna shook his head. "You're a victim, bro. You were manipulated and used. But now you can choose to become the man your son will look up to." For the first time in months, Nanso felt hope, not the false hope Amanda used to feed him, but real hope built on truth. Over the next few days, Ikenna helped him gather every piece of Amanda's digital trail. Emails, phone records, offshore account transfers, bribery communications. It was all there. Amanda had been sloppy in her pride. She never imagined Nanso would turn against her. They compiled the files into a secure folder, labeled and time-stamped. Ikenna advised him to time the release carefully. "Don't just leak it. Make it public. Make it loud. Let her drown in the very attention she used to destroy your wife." Nanso agreed. But first, he needed one more thing. He needed Chica to wake up, to look at him again, not with pain or disappointment, but with even a flicker of trust. Until then, he would wait by her bedside, praying for one more chance to right his wrongs. Chica slowly opened her eyes 3 days later, blinking against the soft light above her hospital bed. The first thing she saw was the tired but watchful face of Nanso sitting beside her, his beard overgrown, his shirt wrinkled, and eyes red from tears and sleeplessness. He stood up quickly, brushing her hair gently from her face. "You're awake," he whispered. Chica looked at him, confused at first, then remembered everything: the market, the collapse, the endless emotional weight. She turned her face away. "Where's Obinna?" she asked weakly. "With my mother," Nanso replied, his voice trembling. "He's safe." There was a long silence. Chica didn't have the strength to shout, and Nanso didn't deserve sympathy. He simply sat there, begging for forgiveness with his eyes. Eventually he said, "I'm not here to explain or justify anything. I'm here to say I was wrong, and I'm going to fix this." Chica didn't respond, but she listened. Over the next 2 days, Nanso remained by her side, feeding her, helping her sit up, and avoiding Amanda's calls. He told her about Ikena, the plan to expose Amanda, and the evidence they had gathered. Chica watched him with guarded eyes. "Why now?" she asked. "Why after all the damage?" Nanso lowered his gaze. "Because I finally saw what she turned me into. And I hated that man." Chica sighed, tears welling up. "You didn't defend me when I was slapped in labor, Nanso. You stood there, and you watched." The silence between them grew thick. Nanso couldn't offer excuses. He simply knelt beside her bed and said, "I'm going to make her pay. Not just for what she did to you, but for what she did to me too." And for the first time, Chica saw a flicker of the man she had once married, not perfect, not restored, but broken enough to change. That night, Amanda called Nanso repeatedly, angry that he hadn't returned. He ignored her. She messaged him threats, "Don't make me remind you who you belong to." But Nanso wasn't afraid anymore. He had all her secrets, and soon, the world would too. He looked at Chica as she slept peacefully, and then at a photo of Obina in his phone, a small smile on the baby's face. He made a vow in that moment, "I will protect you, both of you, even if it costs me everything." The time for fear was over. The time for justice had come. The night was warm and buzzing with energy as Amanda stepped into the private hall she had rented for what she believed was a celebration of her power. Draped in a shimmering gold gown and heels that clacked with authority, she made her entrance like a queen surveying her court. The hall glittered with fairy lights, wine glasses clinked, and laughter echoed. Nanso, dressed in a sharp black suit she had bought him months earlier, welcomed her with a tense smile. "This is just the beginning, baby," Amanda whispered in his ear, mistaking the stiffness in his embrace for nerves. She had no idea she was walking straight into a trap. Nanso had invited every business associate Amanda had ever boasted about, both those she had helped and those she had cheated. Hidden among them were lawyers, reporters, and law enforcement officials Ikena had strategically called under the guise of a corporate networking night. Amanda was too arrogant to notice. She was too used to being worshipped to sense the shift in the atmosphere. The speeches began. Amanda took the mic confidently, boasting about her journey from the streets to the suite, proudly flaunting her accomplishments. She threw jabs at jealous women and praised herself for rescuing weak men and turning them into gold. Laughter followed, but it was hollow. Nanso stepped up next, his heart pounding, but his hand steady. He took the microphone and began gently, thanking Amanda for everything she had done. She beamed, thinking it was praise. Then his tone changed. "But there's another side to the story," he said, pausing as a screen behind him flickered to life. A projector clicked, and Amanda's face paled as video recordings began playing. Her voice calling politicians for bribes, her boasting about scamming investors, her laughing about laundering through fake names. The room fell into shocked silence. "This is the woman I gave my soul to," Nanso said, his voice steady now. "But tonight I'm taking it back." Gasps and murmurs erupted. Amanda tried to interrupt, but two plainclothes officers moved toward her. "Amanda Okoye, you are under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and financial misconduct," one of them said, flashing a badge. Amanda screamed in disbelief, trying to escape the room. "You set me up. You bastard," she shrieked at Nanso, her carefully painted face now contorted in rage. But Nanso didn't flinch. He stood there, eyes locked on hers. "You slapped my wife while she was giving birth, and I did nothing. Tonight I do something." The crowd erupted in murmurs as Amanda was escorted out, cameras flashing, reporters following closely. Her empire had just collapsed before her eyes. And Nanso? He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply walked away, not to enjoy her downfall, but to reclaim the dignity he had allowed her to steal. The following morning, social media exploded with footage from the event. Headlines screamed, "Powerhouse Amanda exposed in shocking scandal," and businesswoman arrested after secret footage leaks. Blogs, newspapers, and even international gossip sites ran with the story. Amanda's companies lost sponsors overnight. Her social media pages were flooded with angry comments, and investors began pulling out in droves. The woman who once walked with her head held high was now a disgraced pariah. But while the world relished her humiliation, Chica sat quietly in her hospital bed, watching it unfold with a complicated mix of emotions. A nurse handed her a newspaper with Amanda's face on the cover, being shoved into a police van. Chica blinked slowly, taking it all in. She didn't laugh. She didn't rejoice. She simply whispered, "God fights better than I do." Meanwhile, Nanso walked through the neighborhood like a man newly baptized in fire. Some people stared with respect, others avoided him, unsure what to make of his transformation. He stopped at a florist and bought a small bouquet of lilies, Chica's favorite, then headed to the hospital. He didn't know what he would say. All he knew was that it was time. When he entered her room, she was breastfeeding Obina. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Then he placed the flowers on her bedside table and sat down. "It's done," he said. "She's gone. Everything she built gone." Chica didn't react. She focused on her baby. After a while she said softly, "And what about what we lost?" Her voice was calm, but her words sliced deep. Nanso nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can fix us. I don't even know if I deserve to. But I promise, I'm never standing on the sidelines again." Days passed, and Amanda's situation worsened. Authorities froze her accounts, her assets were seized, and business partners began coming forward with lawsuits. Rumors spread that she might serve time. From a penthouse to a prison cell, Amanda's descent was rapid and brutal. But in the quiet corners of Chica's heart, forgiveness wrestled with fear. She watched Nanso closely, saw the sincerity in his eyes and the effort in his actions. He now came daily, bringing food, diapers, and medicine. He held the baby with tenderness, read bedtime stories, and even apologized to the nurses who had witnessed the incident months ago. Slowly, the walls Chica had built around her heart began to crack. Not fall, not yet. But there was a shift, a softening. And in that quiet space, the first seeds of healing were sown. Amanda sat in a small interrogation room, stripped of her designer clothes, her nails chipped, her makeup gone. Her once glorious life had crumbled into dust, and for the first time in her life, she was alone. No lawyers rushed to her defense. No friend sent messages of support. Even her staff had abandoned her, too afraid of being connected to the scandal. The very people who once envied her were now mocking her downfall. But what hurt Amanda the most was not the legal trouble. It was the betrayal. She had believed Nanso belonged to her. She had nurtured him, clothed him, elevated him. And he had repaid her with destruction. She screamed into the cold walls of her cell, sobbing not just out of anger, but out of disbelief. How had she lost everything to the same man she once called her puppet? Back in Chica's world, things were changing. She was discharged from the hospital and moved into a small new apartment provided by Nanso's mother, a woman who had returned with humility, asking for her daughter-in-law's forgiveness. Nanso visited daily but never forced his presence. He cleaned, cooked, and played with Obina. He didn't ask for a second chance. He earned it inch by inch. And Chica, still carrying emotional scars, began to feel something unfamiliar: peace. There was no Amanda to fear, no eyes watching her like a spectacle, just quiet moments with her child, and a man trying, truly trying, to make things right. One day, she watched as Nanso fed Obina mashed banana and laughed when the baby smeared it across his nose. Her heart swelled, and she smiled, not fully, but enough for hope to sneak in. The world had moved on from Amanda's scandal, but for Nanso and Chica, healing was only just beginning. Pain does not disappear in a day, and betrayal leaves invisible bruises. But with every gentle word, every quiet apology, every diaper change, and every meal cooked, Nanso showed that he was no longer the man who stood silent in that labor room. He was a man reborn by shame and driven by love. Amanda's empire had fallen, but Chica's dignity had risen. And while forgiveness hadn't yet been spoken aloud, it danced quietly in the air between them, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Chica sat at the edge of her bed, staring out the window as the afternoon sun cast a golden hue over her modest apartment. Obina was asleep beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that gave her peace. But inside, her heart remained a battlefield. The man she had once loved, the man who had stood silent as another woman struck her in labor, was now acting like a different person. It wasn't just the diapers, the meals, or the way he cleaned her bathroom floor without being asked. It was his eyes. They no longer carried the pride or cowardice she had grown used to. They carried remorse. Still, remorse wasn't a cure. It wasn't an eraser. Chica had cried too many tears in silence, swallowed too many humiliations, and endured months of abandonment while carrying his child. So when Nanso came again that afternoon, with her favorite egusi soup and fresh okra from her mother's village, she accepted the meal, but remained silent. "I know saying sorry can't fix it," he said softly, placing the bowl down. "But I'm going to keep showing up until my actions speak louder than my mistakes." Nanso didn't expect forgiveness overnight. After the exposure of Amanda and the chaos that followed, he knew he had only taken the first step of many. What pained him most wasn't just the slap, it was the way Chica looked at him now, like a stranger who once broke her heart and was now asking for scraps of affection. He had lost her trust, her warmth, and her pride in him. And yet he kept coming back, not to force a reunion, but to heal whatever part of her was still bleeding. Each visit, he tried something different. Sometimes it was reading bedtime stories to Obina. Other times it was doing laundry, even when she told him not to. He didn't speak much, only did what needed to be done. He knew words had become cheap. His silence now wasn't cowardice, it was reverence. A silent acknowledgement that he had shattered something precious, and that rebuilding it would take time. One day, as he swept the kitchen, Chica finally spoke. "You let her mock me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You let her slap me while I was giving birth. Do you know what that did to me?" Nanso paused, turned to her, and knelt down. "I do," he said, his voice trembling. "Every night I see it. The moment she raised her hand, and I stood there like a fool. I hated myself for it. I still do." Tears welled up in Chica's eyes, but she wiped them quickly. "It's not about hate. It's about respect. You let her take mine." Nanso nodded, still kneeling. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life giving it back, even if you never love me again." Chica didn't reply. She turned and walked away, but as she entered the bedroom, she closed the door softly, not in anger, but in thought. And for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of consideration. The transition from guilt to responsibility came gradually for Nanso. After Amanda's arrest and the chaos it brought to their lives, he realized that the best apology he could offer wasn't words, it was consistency. He woke up early every day, even before sunrise, just to make breakfast for Chica and Obina. He never imposed himself, but left the food quietly on the table before heading out to run errands or attend interviews. He had abandoned Amanda's network of dirty business deals and shady contracts. Now he was starting from the bottom, offering services as a freelance electrician and technician, skills he once boasted of but hadn't used in years. The money wasn't much, but it was clean. And with each honest naira earned, he began to feel like a man again. Not Amanda's puppet, not a shadow, but a father and a provider for the woman and child he had once failed. Chica noticed the changes. Nanso now carried Obina more confidently, feeding him carefully, changing diapers without complaining, and humming lullabies that sometimes made her smile in secret. He asked about the baby's vaccinations, bought new baby clothes even when they couldn't afford much, and found a way to fix the broken heater in her bathroom without asking for thanks. Slowly, the tension between them began to loosen. They would sit together at times, eating in silence, sharing the same table, like distant friends relearning each other. Chica still didn't let him sleep over, and she rarely touched him, but she no longer looked at him like a stranger. She looked at him like a man rebuilding himself, brick by painful brick. And though her heart hadn't healed completely, the bitterness began to melt, replaced by something softer: empathy. It was on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, while watching Nanso play peekaboo with Obina, that Chica realized something had shifted inside her. The laughter that came from her baby was pure, joyful, and familiar, and the man making him laugh was no longer a stranger. He was a father. A good one. Not perfect, not redeemed in full, but genuine. Chica exhaled deeply, the weight on her chest slightly lighter. Later that night, she handed Nanso a key, not to her heart, but to the apartment. For emergencies, she said flatly. But Nanso didn't miss the meaning. It was trust, small, fragile, but growing. He took the key with both hands, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Thank you." And for the first time in a long while, she didn't walk away. Amanda sat in her mother's old compound in Enugu, a far cry from the penthouse in Lekki, where she once ruled like a queen. Her bail had been secured by an uncle who did it not out of love, but to avoid family shame. All her accounts were frozen. Her properties were under investigation. Her designer clothes, luxury handbags, and imported jewelry meant nothing now. She wore a plain wrapper and a faded blouse, her once manicured nails chipped, her face bare of the makeup that used to mask her pride. She no longer looked like a socialite. She looked like a woman stripped of everything. Her phone buzzed occasionally, but no calls came in. Her so-called friends had vanished. Even her assistant had blocked her. And in the unbearable silence, she finally faced what she had become, a woman who destroyed lives for sport and lost hers in return. For the first few weeks, Amanda blamed everyone but herself. She called Nanso a traitor, Chica a manipulator, and the world ungrateful for turning on her. But the truth has a cruel way of sitting beside you when there's no noise to drown it. She began having nightmares, vivid ones where she saw herself slapping Chica again. Only this time, Chica slapped her back. She'd wake up sweating, heart racing, alone. Eventually, she stopped eating, and her mother begged her to let go of the bitterness. "You made your choices," the old woman said softly. "Now live with them." It was in those dark days that Amanda reached for a pen and paper. She began writing. Not to vent, not to escape, but to confess. She wrote page after page, letters to Nanso, letters to Chica, even one to Obina. Letters filled with apologies, truth, and painful memories. She didn't know if they would ever be read, but writing them was her first act of humility in years. One of those letters made it to Chica. Delivered by Amanda's mother, it was handwritten in shaky ink. It began with, "I slapped you in your most vulnerable moment, and I thought I had won. But I see now that I only destroyed myself." Chica read the letter twice. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled. She tucked the letter into her drawer, unsure of what to do with it. That night, she sat quietly while Nanso fed Obina and asked herself a question she never thought she would ask. What if Amanda was human after all? Forgiveness didn't come easy, but regret, when genuine, plants seeds. And maybe, just maybe, Amanda's letter would become one of those seeds. The sun filtered through the curtains as Chica stood by the mirror, brushing her hair gently. It had been weeks since she received Amanda's letter, and although she had not spoken about it to Nanso, it haunted her quietly. She thought of that day in the labor room often, how vulnerable she had been, and how Amanda's slap had echoed louder than any insult she'd ever received. But what broke her even more was Nanso's silence, the way he stood still, eyes blank, hands unmoving. Yet something had shifted since then. She had watched him evolve, not with grand gestures, but with consistent acts of service. He was no longer the man who vanished into another woman's arms. He was now present, steady, devoted, and that constancy, though unfamiliar, began to warm her wounded heart. It didn't erase the pain, but it layered over it like balm on cracked skin. Healing for Chica wasn't linear. Some days she smiled at Nanso, other days she avoided his eyes. She cried in the shower and sometimes laughed unexpectedly at Obina's antics. Slowly, she allowed herself to feel again, to laugh without guilt, to rest without fear, and to accept help without suspicion. Therapy sessions with a local counselor also helped. The woman, wise and warm, reminded Chica that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. "It means choosing not to let the pain control your future," she had said. Chica took that to heart. She started journaling, reading her Bible again, and speaking words of affirmation in front of the mirror. "I am worthy. I am loved. I am whole. she would say, even when her voice broke. And with each day, her heart began to rise from the ashes Amanda and Nanso had buried it in. One Saturday morning, Chica decided to join Nanso and Obina at the park. It was a simple gesture, but one that meant everything to him. They sat on a bench under a tree as Obina giggled and chased butterflies in the grass. Nanso glanced at her nervously, unsure if this was a temporary peace or a signal of something deeper. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. Chica nodded, watching their son. "He deserves both parents, even if we're not what we used to be." Nanso swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. But she continued, "I'm still hurting. But I see the changes. And I know you're trying." Her voice cracked slightly. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I'm not fighting the process anymore." Nanso reached for her hand, gently. She didn't pull away. It was the first time in months they had touched, and in that small moment they both felt the warmth of something being reborn. Amanda sat on the wooden bench behind her mother's compound, the air thick with humidity and silence. Her world was still in ruins, the court case pending, her wealth gone, her pride shattered. But something in her had changed. It wasn't the loss that transformed her. It was the realization that power meant nothing without peace. She had lost not just status, but her soul in the process of trying to possess someone who never belonged to her. In her quiet hours, she often replayed that slap in her head, realizing how monstrous it had been. She remembered Chica's eyes, wide, confused, filled with pain, and how Nanso had stood frozen. Amanda now saw that moment for what it truly was, a reflection of her own brokenness. She had destroyed love because she didn't know how to build it. So she decided to write again, not out of guilt, but because she finally felt remorse. The second letter she wrote was longer, rawer, and deeper. It wasn't meant for Chica alone, but for Nanso as well. She wrote of her childhood, how her father's abandonment had taught her to manipulate love before it abandoned her again. She confessed how she saw Nanso as a trophy, a man who represented what she could conquer, not who she could cherish. She detailed every fraudulent act she had committed, not to brag but to confess, hoping that exposing her truth might redeem a small part of her soul. She included a final line that struck like thunder. "You may never forgive me, but I hope one day you'll understand that I was just a scared woman hiding behind diamonds and designer shoes." Amanda sealed the letter and gave it to her mother with trembling hands. "If they never read it, that's okay. But please deliver it." A week later, Chica found the envelope resting quietly on her doorstep. She recognized the handwriting immediately. She hesitated at first, tempted to toss it aside. But something in her heart urged her to read it. As she unfolded the pages and read Amanda's confessions, something broke inside her, not with anger, but with clarity. She saw Amanda for who she really was, not a monster, but a woman consumed by insecurity, pride, and unhealed trauma. Chica cried, not because she forgave her, but because she finally understood the depth of the brokenness that led to the betrayal. That evening, she handed the letter to Nanso. He read it in silence, his face unreadable. When he finished, he folded it carefully and said, "Maybe this pain we've all carried wasn't meant to break us. Maybe it was meant to teach us how to love better." Chica didn't reply, but she didn't disagree either. The letter had left a crack in the walls around her heart. And through that crack, light began to seep in. Weeks passed, and life resumed a new rhythm for Chica and Nanso. Their relationship remained undefined, somewhere between co-parents and cautious companions. But there was a calmness now, a sense of mutual respect and shared purpose. Nanso had started a small repair business with Ikena, using his skills to fix generators, install solar panels, and wire homes in their community. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Chica, now stronger emotionally, started a small catering service from home, making local delicacies and snacks for nearby offices. Her hands, once trembling from pain, now kneaded dough and stirred soup with pride. Obina grew fast, crawling with determination and giggling with joy. And although they didn't live under the same roof, Nanso visited daily. Their conversations were light, but they lingered longer now, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with silence that no longer felt cold. It was during a children's book fair at a local event center that fate gave them a moment they hadn't expected. Chica arrived with Obina strapped to her back, wearing a beautiful but simple Ankara gown, her hair tied in a neat scarf. Nanso was already there, setting up a small stand for electrical safety tips for parents, a side initiative he had begun to raise awareness. When their eyes met across the crowd, something warm passed between them. Not fire, not passion, just familiarity, recognition. "You look happy," Nanso said when they finally stood side by side. Chica smiled faintly. "I'm learning how to be." They walked around together, showing Obina colorful books, laughing when he chewed on a leaflet, and even took a photo at the children's booth. A volunteer offered to snap them, and they didn't refuse. The picture, later printed, showed a man, a woman, and a baby, all smiling with something between contentment and hope. As they sat on the grass, watching the sunset, Nanso finally broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be us again?" Chica didn't answer immediately. She watched the sky, then looked down at Obina, who slept peacefully between them. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I know you're not the man you used to be. And I'm not the woman who needed saving anymore." Nanso nodded. "Maybe we can just start with being partners. In raising him. In healing. In growing." Chica looked at him, her eyes soft. "Then let's start there." And just like that, without declarations or promises, they found something stronger than romance. A second chance, built not on perfection, but on truth. The house smelled of fried plantain and baby powder. It had become a familiar scent in Chica's apartment, a combination of motherhood and stability. Nanso was in the kitchen, carefully flipping dodo in hot oil, while Obina sat in his walker, giggling at the sizzling sound. Chica leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, watching them with a faint smile. It had been months since Amanda's fall, months since their last real argument, and yet each day still felt like a test. Trust wasn't something she handed out easily anymore. But she had begun to let her guard down, piece by piece, not because Nanso begged for it, but because he earned it. Through every scraped knee he cleaned, every market trip he ran without being asked, every time he took Obina to the clinic without complaint, he rewrote the narrative he had once ruined. And slowly, something that resembled love began to rise from the ashes of their pain. That evening, they ate together on the floor, their table still under repair. Obina fell asleep after his evening bath, and the house was wrapped in a rare silence. Nanso cleared the plates while Chica dried them, and when their hands brushed, neither pulled away. After the dishes were done, they sat on the couch, closer than they had in years. "I know I can't erase what I did," Nanso said quietly. "And I know there are parts of you that may never forget it." Chica looked at him, her voice equally soft. "I've come to realize that forgetting isn't the goal. It's remembering without bleeding." She leaned into him slightly. "And I'm starting to remember us. Before the chaos. Before Amanda. Before we forgot how to love." Nanso's eyes welled with tears, but he didn't cry. Instead, he reached for her hand and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then let me remind you. Every day. In small ways." Chica didn't reply with words. She rested her head on his shoulder. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was an invitation. Over the next few weeks, the boundaries between them continued to blur. They still lived in separate rooms, but the emotional distance was closing. Nanso took her out on small dates, grilled fish at roadside joints, evening walks after work, sitting outside while Obina played. They talked about dreams again. She shared her plans to expand her catering into office lunch delivery. He told her about possibly registering his electrical brand officially. They became partners in every sense, not just as co-parents, but as two wounded hearts trying to beat together again. One day, after dropping Obina at daycare, Nanso held Chica's waist and said, "I want to marry you again. Properly. This time with honor." Chica chuckled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Let's get through today first." But the twinkle in her eyes told him she wasn't saying no. She was simply saying, "Let's keep rebuilding. Brick by honest brick." The sun rose gently on the morning of Obina's first birthday, casting soft rays across the living room where balloons hung. Small chairs were arranged, and bowls of snacks lined the table. Chica moved between tasks gracefully, setting cupcakes down, stirring jollof rice on the stove, checking Obina's outfit. It wasn't a large party, just a few neighbors, old friends, and family. But it was more than a celebration of a child's birth. It was a quiet resurrection of a family that had once been torn apart. Nanso arrived from the market with ice and soft drinks, kissed Chica on the cheek, and handed Obina a wrapped gift. "You ready for your first party, champ?" he grinned. The baby giggled, clapping his hands. The room that once held tension now carried laughter and light. Guests arrived with smiles and prayers. Ikenna brought his new fiancé and joked loudly about being Obina's godfather. Chica's mother, who had once wanted her to walk away from Nanso completely, now hugged him and whispered, "Just don't fail her again." Nanso nodded solemnly. "Never again, Mama." The party was filled with music, laughter, games, and a slideshow of Obina's growth, from hospital photos to his first crawl. At one point, as the music played softly and guests danced, Nanso took the mic. "I want to thank everyone who stood by us," he began, voice trembling. "This past year has been humbling. I was a man who lost everything, not just my dignity, but the woman who gave me her heart. But today I'm standing in front of you, not just as a father, but as a man who learned what real love looks like." He turned to Chica. "And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you the love I failed to give you before." A hush fell over the crowd. Chica stood there, heart pounding. Tears brimmed in her eyes, not because of the proposal, but because of the journey, the betrayal, the silence, the pain, and the healing. She took the microphone, looked at Nanso, then at Obina, and said, "We've come a long way. I never thought I could trust you again. But every day, you've given me a reason to try. So, if this is what love looks like after the storm, then yes." The crowd erupted in cheers, but for Nanso and Chica, time stood still. They embraced tightly, not as broken people glued together by desperation, but as two souls who had fought, bled, healed, and chosen to love again. And as they blew out the candle on Obina's cake, hand in hand, they didn't just celebrate a birthday. They celebrated a rebirth. A family reborn. Not perfect, but real. Not painless, but stronger than before. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.